video, we're going to talk about exponents and order of operations. To start off, we're just going to review an acronym that helps us remember what order we need to go in whenever we're given a math problem. The way to remember it is this mnemonic device. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, and it stands for P for parentheses, E for exponents, M for multiplication, D for division, A for addition, and S for subtraction. So when we start off with a problem, we want to look at parentheses first. Parentheses actually means any type of grouping symbol. The easiest one to think of is actual parentheses, but sometimes we'll have brackets instead. But also, once we get farther in math, there's other things that could cause us to have a group that needs attention first, like the absolute value bars are an example of that. Or even when we start to have square roots and things like that, we need to look at what's inside and figure out what that is, if that's possible, before we worry about doing other things. The next step we have is we're going to get rid of all of our exponents. And so exponents are the small number that's up above other numbers. What we want to make sure that we do is we only look at what's right next to an exponent. So let's say that we have 2 times 3 to the third power. That third power only affects the 3 right here. And so I do 3 to the third power before I multiply by the 2. The only time that I would do the opposite is if I had parentheses here. If there's parentheses and I have 2 times 3 and that's all to the third power, well, that's a different order. The parentheses would trump the exponents, and so we'd multiply before we raised it to the third power. For multiplication and division, we want to go left to right. If we're going to get tripped up in a problem, most of the time it will have to either do with our exponents because we didn't do our exponents as early as we should have, or division actually is a huge problem. Because if I have 3 times 6 divided by 2 times 7 or something like that, we may want to do this out of order, and there's a way to do it out of order that's still correct. But if we decided, oh, I'm going to do these two and then divide them, that's not going to give us the right answer. So it's safer to say, well, since there's a mixture of the two, let me do 3 times 6 and figure out what that is. Then I'm going to do that divided by 2, and then finally I'll do that answer times 7. So division is really the part that makes that trickier that you have to watch out for. Addition and subtraction is also left to right. And the best way to remember this is just that this is always going to go last. So if you have a lot of different things happening in a problem, unless there's parentheses, you want to save the addition and subtraction until the very end to finish the problem. Only if it's inside of parentheses would we do it earlier, just to get rid of those parentheses. So let's look at some problems that we can do, practice. We're going to start off fairly simple, and I say fairly simple because this problem does not have parentheses or exponents, so we can skip straight to the last part, the last 2 parts. Now, what we want to do is multiplication and division, and then once we've done that, we'll switch to addition and subtraction. That means that I want to focus on 5 times 3 and 6 divided by 2 and figure out what those are, and then put it in with the rest of the problem. So the 7 plus in front is just going to drop down. We'll do 5 times 3 and get 15. This minus sign is going to drop down. and then we do 6 divided by 2, which is 3. Then we just have addition and subtraction left, and we can do that from left to right. We may be able to do that all in one step, or even in our head, but if it takes more than one step for you, that's fine also. 7 plus 15 is 22, minus 3 is 19. So that would be our answer. This next one is a little trickier because we have some exponents, we have parentheses, and so we have to make sure that we're going in the correct order. We want to start with our parentheses and basically get to a point where those parentheses aren't necessary anymore. Inside of our parentheses is 3 plus 4. So we're going to add 3 and 4 together and get 7. But outside of our parentheses, we've got a squared. We've got divided by 7 plus 2 cubed. Now, we would take care of exponents. And it may be that we wanted to do these first two steps combined. And as long as that's fine with your math teacher, then that should be fine. Some math teachers want you to show every single step. Some are fine with you doing a couple steps in your head and then writing down your progress. 7 squared is 49. Divided by 7 plus 2 cubed is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8. Then we have to make sure we do this in the right order. Division comes before addition. So we're going to do 49 divided by 7, which is 7, and then add 8, which gives us 15. We're going to add a step to make this more algebraic. We've got an expression here that has a variable in it. Now, a variable is usually something we don't know, or it's there to represent something unknown. But in this case, for whatever reason, we know that x is actually supposed to be 2. So what we want to do is figure out what this expression is when x equals 2. The first step to this is going to be to put a 2 where the x is in our problem. Everything else is going to stay the same. We still have 8 times 3. In between the 3 and the x cubed is multiplication, so I'm going to put a multiplication symbol there, and then do 2 cubed. And then I've got minus 10. So I now look at this now that there's not an x and say, okay, what are my order of operations? What should I do first? There aren't any parentheses, but there is an exponent. So I'm going to do 8 times 3 times 2 cubed is 8 minus 10. I'm going to do 8 times 3 times 8. And because all of that's multiplication and there's no division mixed in, I can choose what order to do that in. But whichever way you do it, you should get 192. And I happen to have done this problem a few times recently, so that's how I know that off the top of my head. If you're working it out, you could do 8 times 3, which is 24, and then times it by 8, which you might have to go to the side and work that out the old-fashioned way, and there's nothing wrong with that. The first time I did it, that's how I worked it out. Or you could do 8 times 8 and get 64 and multiply that by 3. Either way, you should get 192. We're going to subtract 10 so that we have 182 for our answer. Let's try one that's trickier. This one's going to get pretty complicated because we're going to fill in 3 where n is. There's more than one place n is, and we've also got this fraction in front, which could make things interesting, which is what math people usually say whenever things get harder. So the very first step is I'm just going to take the ends and put 3's where the ends are at. Now, we've got parentheses and brackets here, and so both of those are saying, hey, let's do this first. So what's happening is the brackets tell us to look at this before we worry about the 1/2 and the plus 7. But then when we start looking inside of our brackets, we've got this that is asking for our attention at the very first. So before we do anything else, we want to figure out what 2 plus 3 squared is, which 3 squared is 9, plus 2 is 11. So this is 11. And we got rid of a set of parentheses. Now the brackets are what's taking our attention. So we need to do 8 times 3, which is 24. And then finish the brackets by doing 24 minus 11, which is 13. Now I put parentheses there. I don't really need them. I could have put a multiplication symbol there. But what I'm doing now is 1/2 times 13 plus 7. And this is where there are 2 different directions we could go. Because we could say that 13 is 13 over 1. And then multiply 1/2 and 13 over 1 together, which gives us 13 halves, which we're going to add 7 to. To add 13 halves and 7 together, we would need a common denominator. And to get a common denominator for 7, we need to put it over 1. And then say I want a 2 on the bottom, so I need to multiply the top and the bottom by 2. That's going to change the 7 over 1 into 14 over 2. So that when I add those together, I get 27 over 2. That's one way to go. The other is to say 1/2 of 13 as a decimal is 6.5 plus 7 is 13.5. Now if we realize how to do 1/2 of 13 and change it to a decimal, the math there is easier. But if you're not allowed to use a calculator, if we have fractions that are more difficult than 1/2, then that may not be the way we want to go. So it is good to be able to work with them as fractions or decimals as is required of us. If your teacher has a preference, it's probably fractions, so you might want to make sure you know how to add and multiply fractions. Finally, speaking of fractions, we've got a fraction here, and the only change that this does to order of operations is basically the top is a group and the bottom is a group. And so we want to figure out what the top is, we want to figure out what the bottom is, and then put those together as a fraction. So on top I have an exponent that I have to take care of first. 2 squared is 4. And then I have multiplication. And then the rest of this I can just do left to right, maybe even in one step in my head. And I get 10. For the bottom, I have parentheses, so I need to do 6 minus 1, which is 5. And then I'm going to do 4 times 5, which is 20. So I get 10/20ths. Now, that's not the way we want to leave our answer. We want to reduce that or simplify that so that it's as good of a fraction as we can get, as simplified as we can get. Both of those are divisible by 10, which would give us 1/2 as our answer. Those are just some examples of some order of operation problems. That's the thought process and method that we want to go through. Thanks for watching.